Hi, I'm Lyndon, and I'm an out boss.
Out Entrepreneurs. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And I am super thrilled this week to be interviewing Lyndon Kudlitz, who is joining us all the way from Albany, New York. So, Lyndon, are you ready to inspire fellow out bosses?
I am going to do my best, yes.
Yes. All right. Awesome. Okay. So a little bit about Lyndon. He has over 17 years of experience in LGBTQ services and social justice education. He provides training and technical assistance for healthcare providers, educational institutions, businesses, and organizations, as well as workshops designed for queer and trans communities. Lyndon's background also includes 10 years as a firefighter and EMT professional, running a small arts and t-shirt business, and founding and directing a number of youth leadership camps. So clearly a serial entrepreneur. You're really great to have on the show, Lyndon. And when you're not doing all of that, you are on the board of directors for CRUX, I think is what it's called. And it's the country's largest LGBTQ rock climbing organization. So you're often, when you're not working, scaling, different rock faces around the country, right?
Absolutely.
That's very cool. So I'm excited to learn all about you. And I think to kick us off, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about your current business right now and what makes it unique?
Sure. I am currently running a consulting, education, and training business focusing in LGBTQ issues in general. So helping businesses, organizations, and such provide better services, better work environments, better school environments, and then also doing some more kind of general multi-issue social justice training as well with that. In addition to those things, I also provide workshops for our own community so that we can kind of be our happier, healthier selves. I think what makes me a little bit different than some other folks in the field, and I want to recognize there are a lot of people doing some great work that are similar to this, but I think for me as a trans-identified person, I'm often called on to do trans-specific trainings, which I think is really important to be provided from a trans-identified trainer. And I've been able to kind of find my niche within healthcare. I think what makes me a little bit different than a lot of folks is that, as you read in that lovely bio, I have so many different other careers and other things I've done with my life that actually allows me to connect really well with different types of audiences. So I can go in and work with security guards, or I can go in and work in reproductive health organizations, both of which kind of have, connections to my own background. For me also, one of the things that my clients tend to really enjoy about my trainings is that I choose to bring in a certain amount of self-disclosure to my trainings. And I'm really clear up front that that is something that I choose to do, that I consent to do as part of my work, that I share aspects of my own story, my identity, my experiences with my audiences, but that shouldn't be expected from other LGBTQ people in their lives or when they're, serving those people as their clients. So I think that the storytelling aspect of my work has lent itself really, really nicely to that.
Yeah. And I think that we're in such a challenging time right now. So as soon as you said that you do work in healthcare, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about the current presidential administration and some of the things coming out of health and human services in particular, one of which was a rule change that now allows certain providers to basically refuse services to people that they feel run afoul, I guess, of their religious beliefs. And so I'm just curious in the work that you're doing, especially because I think part of the motivation for that rule change was to target LGBT communities. I'm wondering if that's coming up in some of the trainings right now, and and just kind of how are you responding to folks from a variety of backgrounds, some of whom might not be as open and receptive to your message through the trainings that you're doing?
Yeah, it's been really interesting over the past couple of years, particularly since the ACA went into effect, because I've been able to fall back on a lot of like the laws and the changes that we're seeing that are really helping LGBTQ patients and particularly transgender patients. And I'm worried about what that means now, right? Like I normally can go into a place and be like, here are all the reasons why you should just do this because you're a good person, but also here's why you kind of have to. And I'm losing that second part now. But what I think has been really fantastic is, I continue to be surprised at my clients. I continue to go into places who are just really wanting to do such good work, and they just are at a loss for how to do that, but they really do have the desire and the good intent. So I'm finding that though I think I'm worried about the effects of those laws, I'm seeing a major shift in providers really just wanting to do the right thing anyways.
That's really refreshing to hear. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you for that silver lining. And I mean, you're providing a lot of different training and consulting solutions to a variety of different audiences beyond healthcare folks. Right now, what has you most inspired about what you're doing?
I think seeing that tangible change, right? So, as an example, I've worked with a number of Planned Parenthoods kind of along the like Eastern New York border, and in particular help Planned Parenthood, Mohawk Hudson, and Upper Hudson affiliates get their hormone services started. They got their clinical protocols from somewhere else, but I did the training to make sure they were doing that work in a really great way with their patients. And we have seen in this capital region, this huge shift in what the trans community is accessing for their healthcare and their services. I mean, we were really struggling with people trying to find respectful and knowledgeable providers. People could find one or the other. And now we really are seeing this huge shift. And I'm watching my community network with each other, provide resources to each other, talk about these great experiences. And so I've just been able to literally see the health of my own trans community change.
Thank you for what you're doing. I as someone who is trans, I still go to certain doctors who will Google things in front of me, right? So just to hear that there's a growing level of competency, in parts of New York that are not New York City is something that you should be super, super proud of. And it speaks highly of the work that you're doing. I'm just thinking about right now, you're doing this business, and how many years have you been doing the training and consulting pieces of your business?
My current business has been, the current formation of it has really only been a year old at this point. But I've been doing this type of like training work or telling my story since I was 17. And so it's been a long time.
Right. And so I was just asking that because I usually ask guests about the origin stories of their business. So, rewind a year ago, you have all of this experience of storytelling, changing systems just by showing up and saying, hey, what about me, right? And so clearly you saw a huge gap in what could be done and raising awareness. And so I'm curious, like, what were you doing before you started this business? And what inspired you to start it?
So I'm actually going to rewind even further than that to kind of talk a little bit about how this happened, because often when I'm out, people will ask me like, oh, where'd you get your master's in social work? And I'm like, I definitely don't have that. And, where'd you do this? And what degree do you have? And that's not my origin story at all. So for me, actually, what happened was that when I was in my teens, I lived in Southern Maine, in the Portland area, and I was part of an LGBTQ youth organization. And I was only going there for support group at first, and didn't really do anything else, even though there were some leadership opportunities. When I was 17, I had a really bad car accident, and my girlfriend went into a coma, and I essentially lost her during that process. And I was at the worst place I ever had been in my life. And the staff, noticed that I was not doing well, and they started to throw me these opportunities, like, hey, you want to go to this conference? You want to go to this anti-racism training? You want to join our speakers bureau? And so I started taking up these opportunities and getting involved. I started to live my life thinking, I can't harm myself because I need to be here on Tuesday for a meeting. And I can't leave this because I need to be here on Friday to help some other youth. So I was 17 years old, telling my stories in school. Unbeknownst to me, I was dealing with a brain injury that was yet to be diagnosed. And through that experience as a young person, eventually got offered a job there. And I was youth aged for the organization in my early 20s when I started running its speakers bureau, and I started running its HIV prevention education and a whole bunch of things. From then, I have kind of worked for a number of LGBTQ nonprofits over the years in various capacities. Most recently, that was as the director of training and education for another LGBT center. What I found over the years was that though I was not able to complete college, and I was dealing with this brain injury that kind of affects my ability to read and write, I instead was able to hone in the skill of public speaking and storytelling. So I'm like fast forward, I'm working for this organization. We create a new position for me to direct training and education and really build up this whole program. I'd always been used to basically doing this for free. I thought, I come from this working class background. I don't really want to ask for money. I think also our field has a reputation for doing LGBTQ trainings for free because we've been just so damn happy that people will even have us in the first place. And so we haven't really set the bar as like consultants on it. So I had a executive director kind of push me to start doing that, to start asking for money for the trainings. And from there, eventually over the years, I decided, I'm good at what I do. I know that I'm good at it. I want to advance my career, but the only way to do that is to really become an executive director. And that's not what I want right now. And so there was a changeover in leadership at the organization that no longer aligned with my values or the community's values. And so it was the right time to leave. I was kind of terrified of leaving. My clients were terrified of me leaving. But it was the right time to kind of take my career into a direction that I could really take ownership of and really steer. So I was able to respectfully transition on a lot of those clients with the consent of the organization. And that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing. So I don't have, I think, the path that a lot of people took. I don't have even a bachelor's degree, but I've been able to utilize the skills that I do have and my background as an LGBTQ person to really make a career out of that.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing is super powerful. You're talking about, a really traumatic personal experience that happened in your teenage years. And thank you for sharing that, because I know that the trauma of overcoming that, it sounds like you were able to have a lot of community support and folks that really saw your talent in sharing your stories and getting in front of audiences who could really benefit from what you had to say. And just by doing that, you've clearly transformed a lot of individuals and I'm sure organizations through your work. And that lived experience speaks volumes, right? And it's almost like if you looked back 17 years ago, what kind of program could prepare you for what you're doing right now? I mean, you're basically writing it. So, I think what you're saying probably resonates with a lot of other folks doing similar work. Definitely for myself, in doing some of the culture change work with clients that I engage with, I get that completely in terms of what you're sharing. And you had also mentioned just talking about a culture where you were gaining a lot of experiences working for other people, right? Kind of honing your skills around public speaking and training and things like that. And at some point, you had mentioned just the values of that particular organization no longer aligned with what you believed at your core, didn't align with your why. And so as you're building your own business, and I know you're a year into it, right? So, take this in whatever direction you want. But as you kind of like look to your North Star, when you think about what your business can be, what's maybe one thing that you would do in your business or something that you might be doing now that is really creating a culture, a welcoming culture for folks that may have different lived experiences from you or aren't necessarily a part of that are in alignment with kind of the workplace culture that you're creating right now, but you can really benefit from having different perspectives?
Yeah. I think I'm in a unique situation in that I don't employ other people officially, but when I do frequently try to collaborate with other folks, whether they're other people who are doing trainings like this, or they are community members who have really important stories and voices. And so quite honestly, one of the things that I'm really committed to is paying queer and trans people to be them and to tell these stories and to utilize their skills. So, I think, I don't know, honestly, what comes to mind most for me is things like if I'm going to, ask people to be on a panel for something that I'm putting on, I'm done with having people do that for free. I'm done with exploiting LGBTQ people and their stories and their skills and their time. For me, it's really a priority to make sure that those people are paid and valued for that time. And so I think for me, that's a commitment that is unfortunately a shift away from the type of treatment that we've seen in a lot of our workplaces.
Absolutely. And what you had shared about, it sounded like a supervisor or someone that was helping you develop professionally in the past who encouraged you to say, hey, Lyndon, you should be charging for this. You have expertise here, right? Like you're now giving that back to younger folks who are queer and trans, just kind of reminding young people like your stories are valuable, your time is valuable. And when people ask of you, to carve out time to be there and to help them, there's an exchange, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask for money, and to do this work, right? And I agree. I think that there's still so many systems that will readily pay, a significant amount of sum to bring in, I don't know, transformational leadership consultants, right, to do similar work, and at the same time, we want to have someone come in during Pride Month and talk to us, and can you do that for free? Let's go to a community center and ask someone to do it for free. And it's amazing that still, sometimes in big corporations that's still happening. So I'm really glad that you're out there and you're trying to disrupt what is a challenge, when this is your full-time job. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to kind of shift and talk a little bit more about your own identity and how it does show up in your work. And so what makes you unique, and like similar to some of the other guests, where your work is so centered around doing LGBT awareness raising, or just making sure that people are able to better serve LGBT folks. This question might be a little bit challenging to answer, so you can take it in whatever direction you want. So with that kind of preface, in thinking about your work right now and the clients that you work with, has there ever been a moment that it's been difficult to truly be out in the work that you do? So, and I'm just thinking, you had talked about disclosure, in some of the trainings that you're doing. For example, maybe folks don't know about your gender history or something like that. Has there ever been a moment where you've paused around how out can I be in this situation, because you may have been afraid or concerned that a client might have challenges with working with you kind of moving forward? And if not in your work right now over the past year, can you think of an example in the past where you felt a little boxed in, just to help other guests who are trying to negotiate how out to be in their own businesses?
Yeah, I can't think of like one moment, but there's definitely this pattern that I've had for as long as I've been doing this, right? That I feel like I'm frequently navigating my gender expression in those spaces. And I'm highly aware of what kind of energy in terms of my masculinity, my femininity I'm putting out there, and in terms of how I even dress for a particular gig. And so, I know that like when I go into work with elementary school teachers, I'm performing my gender in a very different way than I am when I'm working with, as I mentioned earlier, like security guards. Right. And I really, really struggle with that. As a genderqueer identified person who also identifies as a femme, I struggle with this idea that I need to essentially, right, because I'm on that like trans masculine spectrum, that I essentially need to like give them enough masculinity so they believe that I'm trans. But how do I do that in a way that I'm actually still being authentic to myself? And that's where I really struggle. I'm very aware of how I perform masculinity. And I think it should be mentioned, right, particularly white masculinity, that allows me to access certain spaces and get in with certain groups, but that often feels really inauthentic to who I am. And so, my way of kind of working around that is like, I'm going to give you this package up front, and then I'm going to slowly subvert the idea of what you thought of me. I have trainings where maybe I'm doing multiple sessions, and the first time I see them, I'll dress more masculinely. The second time I see them, I'll dress more femininely, but then we'll talk about their reactions to that. So I've gotten to the point where I might, right, do those things that feel a little bit uncomfortable, but then I actually, in many cases, am honest about that with my audience when we talk about gender expression and presentation, because I want them to have a very real life example in front of them of the ways that trans people modify ourselves in ways that may feel really uncomfortable, but we do it because it may be to our advantage, or we do it to make things easier on them. And so I process that with them, and I think it becomes a real learning moment.
And it's such a great way for you to be able to navigate this challenge, which sounds like it could be an ongoing challenge as you bring in new clients, right? Of like, okay, I'm going to have to do this process again. And the fact that you were able to use that as a trainable or a teaching moment, with past clients, kind of knowing that trajectory. And it sounds like kind of that initial interaction is giving kind of prospective clients something that they imagine when they're speaking with you on the phone of like, oh, I'm talking to Lyndon. He's a guy, and he's going to show up wearing a suit and tie. And then over the course of, several trainings, you're able to really open up people's minds and allow them to process with you that journey, that, I guess, gender expression journey. So I think that's great. And we've talked about on this show in the past this idea of purposeful disclosure, so having some intention around whether it's coming out around your sexual orientation or your gender identity, that there are moments that are purposeful. There's intention behind it with the expectation that, you may not know the reactions of other folks in a professional setting, in a workplace environment. And there's a little bit of vulnerability and some trust, and hopefully people are able to get to know your authentic self in a way that is respectful and allows you just to not be confined into that box, right? So thank you for sharing that. I think that that's helpful for people, again, who are struggling with negotiating how out they can be in their businesses. I also like to ask guests around what you think might be some superpowers with your lived experiences of being a part of the Rainbow family and being in business for yourself. So what might come up for you that, because of being in the LGBT plus family, allows you to kind of stand out as a business owner?
It's funny, this idea of leveraging my own identity for the purposes of my business. I mean, literally my identity is my business. And so it's a really strange place to be in. And so I think that, I don't know, being queer and trans for me has allowed me to tap into all of this beautiful creativity and resiliency and activism that we see within our communities, right? We have this long, incredible history of that, and it's continuing in such beautiful ways. And so I think that for me, being queer and trans has brought out different aspects of my own creativity. It's allowed me to look at problems from a different perspective and think okay, I'm not going to solve this in the way that everybody else does, because I'm just not everybody else. I like being able to find new ways of approaching things. I think I like to be able to redefine the idea of professionalism. I think that the idea that we have of professionalism in the US is incredibly straight and cisgender and white and Christian and right. And some of those things are me and some of those things are not me. But I like that I've been able to redefine what professionalism can look like in my own business. That when I show up, my clients, maybe they didn't expect it, but they end up getting a very real and authentic conversation. I don't sugarcoat things, right? When we're going to have hard conversations, I'm going to do it in a way that makes it accessible for those people, but I'm going to do it also in a way that doesn't compromise on my values to the best of my ability. And so I think I get to redefine the way that a lot of this work happens. And I learned that from my queer communities.
Yeah. I think the direct experiences of queer communities and entrepreneurs too, right? I listened to a lot of just kind of general entrepreneurial podcasts, and this concept of professionalism popped up a lot there as well. So I really liked you kind of touching in on just kind of dominant culture, white culture, masculinity, and how that plays into what kind of the expectation is. And when people kind of break out into their own businesses, that's still there, all of that kind of social programming. So you're kind of deconstructing that in a way. And it's almost for those of us who are LGBT, we're so used to that in so many ways of just kind of being the architects of our own lives. And so this is just an extension of doing that in business as well. So I like the way you frame that. Thank you. So kind of considering some of the challenges, right? And some of our superpowers, for those folks who are just trying to be a little more authentic in their work, whether they're in their own business now or they're thinking about starting a business, what might be some advice that you would give to them?
So two things come to mind. One is, be a chameleon as you need to be and code switch as you need to, but clearly always keep track of yourself. Don't leave you behind and don't leave your community behind or create these false standards, right? I think that I've got a lot of times where I might need to start a conversation out one way with my clients, and that may kind of start to push at my own boundaries in terms of, I don't know, how I like to think about approaching this work. But I always come back to a place that aligns back with my values and makes it clear the path that my clients need to be on. The second thing, and I think more importantly, and one of the things I think is a little bit different for me than it is for other folks in the field, is that I really try to with every client that contacts me, I ask myself, like, is this my lane or do I need to refer it out to somebody else? I believe that it is more important to have the right person do the job than it is to have me do the job. And that means that sometimes I'm giving up potential business because I'm referring out to my colleagues and other folks that I trust and not taking that gig. But ultimately, that means that the client is getting the person that they should be, right? So if somebody contacts me and it's like a social work provider who works almost predominantly with people of color, I don't think that I should be the one at the front of the room for that. I don't think that I should be the trainer. But let me connect you with a trans trainer of color who I trust and who I think is awesome. Mm-hmm. And so my second piece of advice is like, stay in your lane and know when to refer out to others. That humility is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I love what you're saying for both pieces of advice of don't leave yourself behind, really center your business around who you are. And also remember that you can't be everything to everyone. And if you continue to say yes to everything, when you know that you may not be the right person, you're going to lose your why really quickly. You're going to forget why you started your business, and then you just become a freelancer, right? So I think what you're sharing is really, really valuable. Before we switch into kind of talking more about business mindset, I wanted to ask one other question, and it kind of links up to some of the work that you're doing around mentorship for younger queer and trans trainers. And that's, ways that you are using your business to give back to LGBT communities. So you've already given a great example. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if there's other ways that you're doing that now or things that you have a vision for in the future of how you're really going to strengthen, our communities and especially communities in Albany, New York.
Yeah. I mean, there are three things that really come to mind, right? The first, actually, I think goes back to what we were talking about with, right, getting paid for this work.
Right.
So many of us have been asked to do pro bono stuff all the time, right? I'll have this whole conversation with somebody and then like 30 minutes into it, they'll be like, oh yeah, we can't pay you. Mm-hmm. So with that, I'm actually able to say to my clients, hey, you know what? Thank you, but I reserve my pro bono work for those who need it the most. And that means that I provide essentially pro bono work to queer and trans youth specifically when it's queer and trans youth led, or when something is being led or designed for trans people of color. And so those are my two pro bono categories. I make money from other people in part so that I can provide those services back to queer and trans youth and trans folks of color. The second thing is that when I do community workshops, I for LGBTQ folks, I do those sliding scale. And I believe really thoroughly in the power of sliding scale. And I find that it actually works out best for the audience and it works out best for me too. The third is that, and to be honest, I've always been a really busy person. I've been involved in a lot of projects and a lot of stuff going on that I'm really passionate about. But as I was kind of nearing the end of my time in my last, job at the center I was working with, I noticed that I was exhausted, right? I spent all day training other people and answering other people's questions. And I was dealing with, crisis situations coming up from clients at the center and all of these things. And I didn't have any time left when I was done with work. And now as a freelancer, I have enough energy again. 5 o'clock rolls around and I'm not exhausted. And so instead I'm choosing to use that time, right? It frees me up to actually do other types of LGBTQ and racial justice organizing that I'm really passionate about. So being a freelancer and getting to set those hours for myself and getting to be my own boss makes me a lot more available to my communities and to other people's communities in ways that I just wasn't before.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. It's your time is freed up because you're doing this full time, and also the work that you're doing, it's in alignment with your life's mission, right? Or you just seem like a very purpose-driven individual, right? And so it's in alignment with who you are and what you want to accomplish in the world. And I think that really makes a difference. And so many folks, at least in these kind of very large corporations that I work with, there's a lot of people that just have kind of forgotten what their why is, what their purpose is, and it's a real struggle. And so I think you're you're one of the few who has it, right? And that gives you additional energy to do amazing community work when you're not doing all the work that's paying the bills. So a few questions on mindset. And this is just something that I like to ask guests because I know for a number of folks, the feelings of not being good enough or not ready yet often pop up. And I think that's kind of linked with the imposter complex or imposter syndrome. And this might be relevant now. I mean, you're relatively new in your business. Have those feelings ever popped up for you? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Oh, gosh. I feel like I'm still trying to deal with that, right? I think about that imposter syndrome so frequently. And I think that was actually a big problem in trying to ask for money for the first time, as even with an organization, right? I've been doing these side gigs outside of organizations for the last 17 years. But now I'm kind of faced with okay, I really have to believe in myself because I have to believe in what I'm selling you. And I really, really do. I believe in the product that I'm selling you, but believing in myself and my ability to do it's challenging. I think it's challenging for any of us, but I think I'm constantly trying to revel in the small successes, right? I can come home at the end of the day and be like, dang, I was really good at that one today. And so, yeah, I'm just constantly trying to remind myself of the ways in which I'm really good at this and being honest about the ways in which I need to still get better.
Yeah. And so I think that's really helpful and you're not alone. I mean, we've interviewed guests on here who's some folks have had businesses for several decades and these feelings still pop up for them. Do you have any kind of self-care rituals that you might do that help you kind of get out of the imposter syndrome, the imposter complex?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things that come to mind. One is that I'm always continuing my own education. I'm constantly going to other trainings, webinars, things that other people are putting on, because it's important for me to keep up to date with what's going on. So the more informed I feel and the more other people's voices I have in my head, the more I think I'm going to be a well-rounded educator. So that's a real big commitment that I have is I never, ever want to stop going to trainings and education and continuing that work myself, right? I may not do it in the academic way and have a degree for it, but I have it in a really non-traditional way and I'm committed to that. The other thing is that this is going to sound kind of cheesy, but it's important to me. And that's that when I started out doing this when I was in my teens, I one day was presenting in the school, telling my story about being me, and students submitted their anonymous questions. And there was this comment that was passed on to me on a little scrap of paper. And the student had written truth over harmony. And I still have that scrap of paper. It is nearly 17. We're 17 years later. I still have that piece of paper. And that has stayed with me. That mantra has stayed with me because I don't know. It really struck me. It really struck me that this is how I'm going to live my most honest self, and both in terms of my identity and in terms of what I'm passionate about doing in the world. So truth over harmony. Thank you very much to the 16-year-old student who wrote that.
Yes. That's beautiful. And it speaks to the work that you do, right? I mean, you're speaking truth to power and that's not easy. And it takes someone who is pretty diplomatic and still can be firm, when folks might not be providing those inclusive services or whoever you're talking to, whatever audience, that you're showing up and continuing to do that work. And that young 16-year-old is giving you that mantra every day to continue doing that, which I think is really valuable in your commitment to self-education and constantly learning, right? Leaders are readers. So, that's going to allow you to continue just leading in the work that you're doing. Building a business is definitely kind of like raising a kid in some ways, where it takes a lot of people to help you. And so I know for myself and for a number of other guests that I've interviewed, asking for help is sometimes a challenge, right? There's so many people that I know, and I consider myself one of the types of people that love to help other people and to be a connector. And yet sometimes when I get stuck in business, I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then I'm like, oh, wait, there's all of these people around me I can ask. And so what are some strategies when you get stuck? How do you ask for help? Is that a struggle for you? If not, help us, help us who struggle with some of those strategies.
Yeah, I definitely am one to like crowdsource my community very frequently, for help, for answers, for their opinions on like how I should even do a certain training, right? I just did like a talk with a group of elementary school students, and I was like, all right, people, this is my first one with the elementary school students. You got to help me out here. And I had my friend's fourth grader give me feedback, and it was perfect. And I like utilized the fourth grader's feedback, and it was beautiful. So I don't know. For me, asking for help is something that's really important. I'm also really fortunate that, I have a father who has been self-employed for most of my life. And I'm really lucky that, even though I get to pick the brains of my own community for like, how do you do LGBTQ stuff? I get to pick my dad's brain for like, how do you run a business? Nice. and so I feel like it's just been, I've had kind of that natural role model in my life for most of my life. So I really want to give a shout out to him for that, but also recognize that that's a really like unique privilege to have in being an entrepreneur. So with that said, I think that connecting with other people who are running their own businesses is really, really key. And clearly like a podcast like this is incredibly helpful with that. So I just think that as queer and trans people, we have the ability to do so much networking, and overall we're all already really good at doing that networking, that figuring out how to like run your own business and get better and better at it is just a key part of those conversations.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful that your dad is kind of serving as this de facto business mentor and being a cool dad in general, it sounds like. In addition to him, who are some, do you have other business mentors, or are you a part of a mastermind? What are some other ways that you stay connected through the networking that you are doing with other business owners?
Yeah, some of it's just like other queer and trans friends I have in my life. I've also been able to build a good relationship with my local Chamber of Commerce, who is also a client of mine. They have actually a whole like entrepreneurs boot camp, which I go and speak at sometimes, but I also actually want to take part in it. So I get to, I think, utilize some really formal business things, and then also my community members. I sit on an advisory committee to the New York State Department of Health, made up of like trans and gender nonconforming folks. And though we have a particular purpose for that advisory group, it's also been really clear that like we are supporting each other in building our careers, whether it's within a nonprofit system or it's, doing freelance like I am. And so quite honestly, there are some like phenomenal trans women of color in my life that I learn a lot of this from. And really, I don't think they get enough credit for like how damn amazing they are. And so I have a group of women around me who I just really, really honor and appreciate for everything that they contribute in formal settings and informally.
Nice. Okay, so this is really great. Lots of good mindset hacks here, I think. And what I want to do right now is take a very short break. This is like one of my favorite parts of the show. We're going to jump into the bonus round, where we're going to get to know Lyndon just a little bit better, gain some insights on how we can bring our whole selves to work, and then learn one way that we can stay in touch with Lyndon after our conversation today. Aspiring out bosses, are you struggling with taking that first entrepreneurial leap? Does the imposter syndrome prevent you from getting started? Have you considered seeking support, but you're just not sure where to turn? Look no further. The Out Entrepreneur now offers a coaching and mentorship program where you can access support and strategies to shift your mindset from employee to entrepreneur. If you're looking for accountability and a mentor who successfully busted out of the 9-to-5 lifestyle, let's schedule a time to talk today. Visit www.outentrepreneur.com and look for show notes from today's episode to schedule a call. Again, the URL is www.outentrepreneur.com. Together, let's welcome you to the wonderful world of being an out boss. Lyndon, are you ready to inspire and field some quick fire questions here?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so I think you've already answered this, but maybe there's a different mantra or quote that helps you stay focused on your business. I don't think it hurts to say the mantra that you've already stated already. So,
I'm just going to go with that one, which is truth over harmony. It's really important to me. Yes, that one.
Okay, awesome, easy. Okay, so can you share one personal habit that helps you master yourself and your business?
Other than continuing my own education, I believe in what I'm selling. Like, I'm going to keep coming back to that. I think what makes me an effective business person, and I feel weird about having to like sell people things, especially selling LGBTQ things, but I really thoroughly believe that what I have to offer is changing lives. And when I feel passionate about that, my clients feel passionate about that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's been really key.
Yeah. Changing lives and through the work that you're doing, oftentimes, especially in healthcare situations, you're saving lives. So that's huge. So name one thing that you readily delegate in your business to stay focused on what you're good at.
Oh, what I readily delegate. Oh, honestly, it's the referring out to other people. It's like, it's delegating, it's asking other people to do things that I don't think I should be doing. But I'll also say that sometimes I ask other people to just do things like bring me food, and that's
the essentials, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I get that.
Nice. So 2 more questions for you. All right. So can you share one piece of advice to inspire the next generation of outbosses to take that first entrepreneurial leap?
Yeah, I'd say just remember the way that you do it doesn't have to be the way that others do it. Like, utilize your own unique characteristics, your flaws, your strengths. Like, those are going to be the things that set you apart, and that's going to be why people choose you. That's going to be what makes you memorable.
Right. It's the like, know, and trust. And the more that you can be yourself, the more that you can be yourself when you're working with your clients, right? So, Lyndon, this has been awesome. I'm really glad that we had the time to connect and for me to get to know you a little bit better. Definitely, I'm sure you've inspired a lot of our listeners, and I'm sure many folks want to know where they can get more of you. So where can we find you online, and how can we stay in touch with you?
So the best place to find me online is lyndonconsultingservices.com. And Lyndon is spelled Lyndon. So lyndonconsultingservices.com.
Awesome. Okay. So Outbosses, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. It is always my privilege to connect with you and so many inspiring outbosses like Lyndon. So for details from today's conversation, definitely check out our show notes at www.outentrepreneur.com. And as a next step, consider subscribing to the podcast. Leave a rating and review in iTunes. That really helps the show get known to other folks who haven't heard of it yet. And be sure to share it with a friend or a loved one. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.